me Lucky, or Titan Cat, whichever you prefer to call me. Or, as I'm known on my Amino page, Bill the Cocky Dorito. Anyway, so we're gonna come back to this stuff. Right, you can't see my cursor. Well, we're on chapter 4, I Wish. This one takes place in February. So, okay. Just give me a sec. I gotta prepare for this, cause yeah, I sucked last time. Okay. There was a knock at the door. Ford went to open the door and found his brother standing there with a smile. "Stanley, you came," Ford said as he hugged his brother tightly. "Yeah, why wouldn't I?" said Stan as he hugged back. "Well, I thought you didn't hear the address because my phone cut out," said Ford as he let go. "Well, aren't you gonna invite me in?" asked Stan as Ford nodded. "Right. I'm so glad to see you," said Ford as Stan came inside and looked around. "You really embraced his whole being a nerd thing, didn't you?" said Stan with a chuckle as he wrapped his arm around his brother's shoulders. "Well, I've been doing my research on this town, and it's like an anomaly magnet," said Ford with an excited tone, "but we can talk more on that later. I'll show you to a room you can stay in," said Ford as he walked down the hall to a room that Stan could stay in. Stan put down his bags and Ford sighed. "Stanley, look, I'm sorry about everything before. I just hope we can put that all behind us," said Ford as he avoided eye contact with his twin. "Look, I'm glad we're putting it behind us. Honestly, I don't need the apology I was looking for. That look on your face is enough," said Stan with a smile. "I forgive you, Stanley," said Ford as he looked up and had tears in his eyes. "Stop it, Ford. If you start, you know I won't stop," said Stan as he punched Ford in the arm and started to tear up. "I'm sorry. I just missed you so much," said Ford as he sniffled. "I miss you too," said Stan as he hugged his brother tightly, and they both began to cry. Later in the week, Stan went to talk to Ford when he caught Ford and Fiddleford cuddling up on the couch asleep. That's not what it says, but I'm rolling with it. Stan walked up and poked Ford in the face. Ford opened his eye and stared at his brother. "Hey, bro," said Stan in a low voice as Ford began to panic. "Stanley?" asked Ford as he made a worried look. "Hey, if you're worried I'm gonna judge, I'm not. You liking men is totally fine. Maybe that's why every time I pushed you to talk to a girl, you would get nervous," said Stan as Ford nodded. "That's part of it," said Ford with a sigh. "But you're completely okay with this?" asked Ford as Stan waved his hand. "Of course, I've always kind of suspected anyways," said Stan with a smile. "You what? I thought I hid that part of me really well," said Ford with a sigh. "Whatever, I'll leave you be," said Stan as he walked away. Ford was relieved that Stan had been so accepting of this side that he had kept hidden from everyone. Ford went through the entire pregnancy with his brother at his side. Years went by. Stan helped Ford raise this little girl. Time passed so quickly. Suddenly, he was an old man, and life seemed different. Life seemed so much more real than before. He was sitting in a dark room, and Ford wasn't seeing from his eyes. He was someone else's. He had no control over what was happening. He saw what looked to be the same girl he saw before, but she was much older now. He could hear Bill laughing. "I told her, Stanford, you're expendable," yelled the girl in Bill's voice as she had a knife in her hand. She swung the knife and Ford shot up, laying in bed. It was a dream. It was all a dream. As Ford was relieved it was all a dream. Or was it a message from Bill? Ford asked himself. "You're expendable," Bill's voice rang in his head. That one kind of has a confusing ending, but I liked it. I rewrote it just to have that specific ending, so you didn't know in the beginning or the end if it was, a dream or not. Okay, this one takes place in May. So, Ford and Fiddleford had constructed a makeshift ultrasound machine, and it worked perfectly due to the time Fiddleford had spent building computers. They had tested it many times, and Ford kept a black journal on everything relating to the pregnancy, including the time he has spent being pregnant. Today they were going to check the child's gender. Ford was quite excited, not only for the knowledge, but also in hopes if the child was female, Bill wouldn't want her. But he knew if Bill was desperate enough, he would take her. Fiddleford set up the machine and smiled over at Ford. You know, I've really enjoyed our time together, said Fiddleford as he sat next to Ford. So have I, said Ford with a smile. Once everything was on and the process was started, Ford carefully watched the screen, figuratively, holding his breath. Stop, said Ford as he pointed at the screen. It's a girl, Ford said with a smile. Good eye, said Fiddleford with a smile. After the ordeal, Ford and Fiddleford snuggled up on the couch together. I'm glad I'm not doing this by myself, said Ford as he was writing in his journal. What are you writing? Asked Fiddleford as he peered over at the journal, seeing photos taped to the pages. Writing mostly in pen. But one thing caught his eye. They were measurements and personal notes. Well, at the moment, just a few thoughts that occurred to me, said Ford as he waved the pen he was writing with. Like? Asked Fiddleford as he leaned his head on Ford's shoulder. Well, for instance, some name ideas. One of them just keeps showing up in my thoughts, is Onica. It's not a usual name you hear, but I'm still unsure, said Ford as he flipped through the pages in the journal. I like it. I think Onica would be a great name. What else have you put in there? Asked Fiddleford as he watched Ford flip through the pages. Well, I did write this message to anyone who would read this. Hopefully no one does, muttered Ford as he felt this would be gravely important to keep secret due to what Bill had told him. What does it say? Asked Fiddleford as Ford flipped to the front page, and it read, Dear Reader, I am Stanford Onica Pines, but I prefer to be called Ford. I don't know who will be reading this, but I hope you can keep an open mind. Everything you are about to read is 100% true, and my child would be the proof, but I would only trust this information to someone I trust with not only my life, but also the child's. So, if you're reading this, I trust you not to tell anyone this information. So, would you trust me with this journal? Asked Fiddleford with a smile. You're pretty much living the information that's in here, so highly doubt you'd need to read it, said Ford as he smirked at Fiddleford. True, but I still want to read it, said Fiddleford as he nuzzled his face against the side of Ford's neck. Ford turned bright red as Fiddleford lightly and gently kissed his boyfriend's neck. Ford bit his lip, trying not to smile, but of course Ford couldn't help but smile. Fiddleford, stop, giggled Ford as Fiddleford continued to lightly kiss Ford's neck until he looked into Ford's eyes and kissed him deeply. Is that better? Asked Fiddleford as Ford smiled. Sure, let's go with that, said Ford as Fiddleford smiled. I didn't hear a no, said Fiddleford as he then kissed him. They laid together for hours while Ford still wrote in his journal, until Ford fell asleep and Fiddleford prepared to leave, but before he kissed Ford on the forehead and left. Okay, this one has a specific date because I felt it would be necessary to mark the day she was born. But I didn't realize at the time when I dated this that I was gonna make it a two-parter, so yeah. Also, I forgot how time worked apparently. So, let's just read it, This one takes place on September 18th, 1979. Okay. September 18th, 1979. Ford laid in bed in the middle of the night, finding it hard to sleep. He had a stabbing pain in his stomach that was just preventing him from getting any shut-eye. He sighed and decided to just lay in bed awake, hoping this pain would eventually subside, so he could get some rest. Finally it did, and with that he tried to fall back asleep. He slowly fell asleep, but then the pain struck again. He sighed and realized what was happening. Ford looked at the clock and wrote down the time in his journal, 10:45 p.m. Okay. Ford had started going to bed earlier than usual for Onica's health long before he had named her. He then got up and went over to his phone. He had previously told Fiddleford that he would call him whenever he went into labor, if he wasn't already with him. He dialed his number, and he picked up within a few seconds. "Fiddleford McGucket," said Fiddleford as he picked up the phone. "Fiddleford, it's Ford. I think I'm going to labor, but it could be false," said Ford as Fiddleford sighed. "You still want me to come, don't you? You still want me to be there, don't you?" asked Fiddleford as he sounded very sure that that was what Ford wanted from him. "Please?" asked Ford in a bit of a scared tone. "I'll be there. You know, you're lucky that I love you," said Fiddleford as Ford smiled at the comment. "I know. Thank you for putting up with me," said Ford. "Uh-huh," said Fiddleford as he hung up. While waiting for Fiddleford, Ford gathered the supplies he had gathered previously many times. At some point he just left them all in a pile in his room. He had set a few pillows on the floor and sat down. He waited for Fiddleford, who was in no rush to get there, because this was not the first time Ford had called him, thinking he was going into labor. Every time he thought so, Fiddleford rushed to him if he wasn't already there. He kind of lost the excitement he had the first time he first had when Ford told him he could give birth any day now. That was 3 weeks ago. Fiddleford got there within 30 minutes or so. He walked into the house and looked around. Ford was nowhere to be found. "Ford, I'm here. Sorry it took a while. I stopped off to get a few things," called Fiddleford as he went into Ford's room with a plastic bag full of things he got from the Dusk to Dawn convenience store. He went into Ford's room and saw Ford sitting on the floor, clenching the edge of the blanket that was on the floor in his fists. "Things are getting worse, I bet," asked Fiddleford in his own way, as Ford took a deep breath and sighed. "Yes, they're getting much worse, but on the bright side, at least it's real this time," said Ford with a smile. Fiddleford sat down and set down the plastic bag. "How are you feeling?" asked Fiddleford as he took Ford's hand. "At the moment I'm fine, but every few minutes things feel like they're going to hell in a handbasket. But it's all for the best," said Ford with a weak smile as he fixed his glasses. "Well, at least you know that," said Fiddleford as he placed his hand on the side of Ford's face. Ford bit his lip as another contraction hit. "You shouldn't do this. Here, take my hand," said Fiddleford as Ford gripped his hand tightly. Fiddleford didn't mind the fact that Ford was crushing his hand, because he enjoyed the fact that Ford was afraid to be without him in his trying time. Fiddleford appreciated that Ford trusted him with the information of this pregnancy, and that he wanted him to be there when his daughter was born. Hours had passed, and Fiddleford had tried to help the best he could. Ford appreciated the fact that he was just there, let alone everything else he's been doing. Ford began to breathe heavier with each contraction. Fiddleford couldn't help but feel worried for Ford's safety. He was unsure if his body could withstand the harsh conditions most women must go through when giving birth. So he made an assumption that the male body shouldn't be able to go through that. What neither of them knew was that Ford's body was permanently warped in a way so his body would be able to go through a pregnancy and childbirth more than once. Bill made sure of that. That's 3. Should I go on? I'm gonna do one more because this is a two-parter. So yeah. Oh wait, I didn't mention, but that was the start part one, part two. This is that was part one. This is part two. So now the date has changed. It's September 19th, still 1979. Like duh. Minutes started to feel like hours to Ford. Each contraction felt like an eternity, and the moments of relaxation felt like they were getting shorter. Hiccups. Ford wanted this to speed along, but he knew he had to be patient, or else to him it would last longer. Fiddleford was in a consistent state of worry for Ford, but he knew Ford was fine. He just couldn't help but worry. Fiddleford checked the time. It was 3:45 a.m. Hours had passed, and things seemed to be coming along perfectly, according to Ford. He had read many books on pregnancy before his pregnancy became obvious. He wrote down notes in a notebook, thoughts on what he could logically think this experience would be like. He thought his notes would be enough to prepare him, but they weren't. The pain was excruciating. His legs felt like they were going numb when he wasn't even putting weight on them. He walked around for short periods of time, but with the way he had to walk, it was more like a waddle than anything else. Fiddleford helped him, though he was unsure if it was a good idea, but his opinion wasn't really worth much compared to Ford's extensive research on this situation. Ford was doing his best to try and conceal how much pain he was in, but of course Fiddleford could see straight through that. "Maybe you should sit," said Fiddleford as Ford clutched the side of his stomach. The side of his stomach as another contraction hit. I, Ford said as he could barely get a word out through the pain. "I know what you're going to say, and no, you're not fine. You're having a child right now, and I know you did a lot of research about this experience, but personally, I think you should just try to relax instead of tiring yourself out like this," said Fiddleford as Ford smiled as the contraction passed. "I was going to say I agree," said Ford with a chuckle as Fiddleford smiled. "Oh, I guess I jumped the gun there," said Fiddleford with an embarrassed look on his face. He helped Ford sit down when suddenly as Ford relaxed, a gush of fluid burst from between his legs. Ford groaned as the contraction hit much harder than before. Fiddleford helped Ford get his pants off in order to start the process. Fiddleford placed his hand on Ford's inner thigh and smiled. "Okay, this is what we were waiting for. Now when the next one hits, push," said Fiddleford as Ford nodded, even though he knew what he was supposed to do. Just hearing Fiddleford's voice kept him feeling at ease. It passed, and Ford caught his breath. Then another one hit almost immediately, or at least that was the way it felt. He pushed, and Fiddleford had a smile on his face. "Good, that's good," encouraged Fiddleford as Ford could feel her moving through his body. Ford groaned loudly due to the pain. Fiddleford constantly encouraged him to keep going, which was something he was going to do even if Fiddleford wasn't here, because he had to. This pain went on for much time. Alright, that's what I wrote. Went on for much time. There was almost no time to rest. He had to go on, though he was exhausted. Fiddleford's encouraging words were being drowned out by the sound of Ford's heart racing. He couldn't even hear himself. Everything below his waist was in so much pain he couldn't really feel anything else but the pain. Fiddleford glanced up at the time. 6:38 a.m. Okay, suddenly the pounding in Ford's ears was completely gone when the sound of his infant daughter crying out for him caught his full attention. Tears streamed down his cheeks as he opened his eyes to see Fiddleford holding her. He cut the cord and handed her to Ford. As Ford marveled over the fact that she was in his arms, Fiddleford sat next to him and smiled. She's beautiful," stuttered Ford as he smiled. Yeah, I can help you take care of her if you need any help, of course, said Fiddleford as Ford took Fiddleford's hand and leaned over and kissed him. And that is that. Not reading anymore because, yeah. That was actually a lot less longer than I thought it was going to be. I really shaved down the time, apparently. So, yeah, that is that. The next chapter will be taking place a little further after. So if you like this video, like, comment, subscribe, wonderful jazz, and we'll see you all in the next video. Bye!